Hey, that was probably your new New Orleans Saints head coach demolishing a dynastic team on the world stage. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as a Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net and Saints analyst with WWL TV. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, I want to dive into a lot about what we saw from Kellen Moore during Super Bowl 59. We'll get to our mock draft in tomorrow's show. I want to take a look at scheme and game plan adjustments on the offensive side that you can expect based upon what we saw on the NFL's biggest stage. We'll dive into some of the live tracked adjustments that I shared with insiders during the game. We'll bring you that today. And I want to lead off with just the truth. And that is Kellen Moore absolutely demolished the Kansas City Chiefs, a dynastic team en route to New Orleans. We got all that and much more for you on today's episode. Whether it's your first time or your next time, we thank you for being an everydayer and for making us your first listen here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, where you can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Well, the expected New Orleans Saints next head coach, Philadelphia Eagles offensive coordinator Kellen Moore, laid out an absolute demolition plan of the Kansas City Chiefs defense and executed it perfectly on the NFL's biggest stage. And if I'm looking at this from the fan perspective, I think you should be pretty excited about what a guy like Kellen Moore has the ability to bring to your team's offense. Now, I maintain what I said the other day, that probably one of the most important, if not the most important decisions that Kellen Moore will make in the early days of his head coaching tenure here in New Orleans, assuming that he is indeed the head coach, which is to be expected at this point, will be hiring a defensive coordinator, because what a difference that Vic Fangio defense made for Philly. But we're a Saints podcast, right? We're not here to talk about the Philadelphia Eagles defense. I'm here to talk about what's coming to New Orleans. And so looking at Kellen Moore and seeing what it was that he was able to pull off against this Kansas City Chiefs defense shows you a lot of things that you should be excited about as a fan. The first place that I want to start is the talent, of course, that Kellen Moore was working with. There's been a lot of conversation around, Kellen Moore looked great calling plays for Jalen Hurts, who's a franchise quarterback, one of the best offensive lines, if not the best offensive line in football, 2 stud wide receivers, as well as a generational running back with an elite defense leading the way over on the opposite side. But I would like to remind you that there was a time where the Philadelphia Eagles didn't have that. They didn't have the franchise quarterback. They didn't have the generational running back last year. They didn't have the elite offensive line and the elite defense led by one of the NFL's best defensive coordinators. Bear in mind, it's not just Kellen Moore's first season in Philadelphia, but it was Vic Fangio's first season in Philadelphia as well. So the idea here is that even though the New Orleans Saints don't have those talents either, they don't have a proven franchise quarterback at this time. They've got promise, they've got potential, but they don't have proven just yet. Even if you consider Derek Carr as a winning quarterback for the New Orleans Saints, 14-13, barely a winning quarterback, but a winning quarterback nonetheless, and a quarterback that's thrown like 30 touchdowns to 9 interceptions over the course of his time in New Orleans, over the course of his, last 17 games, whatever it is. Still not a long-term option for the New Orleans Saints going into his age 34 year. I say going into my age 35 year. But the fact of the matter is that, New Orleans doesn't have that. But that's kind of the point. Typically, teams that are hiring new head coaches because they fired their previous one mid-season don't have a franchise quarterback and the elite offensive line and the generational running back and the elite defense. That's kind of why they're in the head coaching search in the first place. So you got to start somewhere. And starting with the 36-year-old innovative offensive mind certainly is not the worst way to go. One of the things that I loved that I saw from Kellen Moore, so moving on from that, look, it shouldn't be surprising or disappointing that the Saints don't have those things. They're not supposed to have those things right now. That's why they're looking for a head coach. You got the head coach. Now you go and get those things or something similar to that level of talent, just like the Philadelphia Eagles did over the course of many years. Anyway, the other thing that I really enjoyed that I saw from Kellen Moore that wasn't really game plan or play calling or anything like that was at an early point on a 4th and 2 down the right sideline. Jalen Hurts completes a pass down the field to A.J. Brown. A.J. Brown gets flagged for offensive pass interference, and Kellen Moore went off, yelling, shouting at the ref, at the officials, all this other stuff, hands up in the air, all that. That, to me, was that display of fire, of ferocity, of tenacity, the leadership, things like that you do want to see. That was, a reminder of like Darren Rizzi's tenure, right? When he was getting on referees, getting on players and all those other things. I liked seeing that fire from Kellen Moore. So it was good to see that that's there. I don't think that that's the norm for him. I don't think that he's somebody that you're going to get that clip of every single week or every single game or anything like that. But just seeing that that's there and seeing him rally to his players' defense, that's the kind of stuff that earns you points. That's the kind of stuff that generates buy-in, that gets players believing in you, is seeing you believe in them. So I really liked seeing that from Kellen Moore as well. And then finally, one of the other things that I really enjoyed watching from Kellen Moore in this game really just kind of came down to the way that he called this matchup. I thought that he did a good job adjusting throughout, which we'll break down kind of the finer details of those adjustments here in a sec. I liked the fact that he continuously took what it is that the Kansas City Chiefs defense gave him. He never got too big for his britches, and he never got cute. That was the other thing that I really enjoyed too. No trick plays here and there and all these other things like, oh, it's the Super Bowl, it's time to show off, let's do something a little funky, right? Water boy, it's the last game of the year, can't hold anything back now kind of stuff. No, none of that. And I enjoyed that. I liked seeing him find his pocket and stay in his pocket. I like seeing him find his bag and stay in his bag. The moment wasn't too big for him to where he felt like he had to do anything outside of the ordinary, to where he felt like he had to do anything extra. One of the things that he talked about beyond authenticity as his leadership style was also the idea of kind of being calm and cool. This was an example of where calm and cool really paid off. It can be really easy going up against a team that's going for its 3rd consecutive Super Bowl to get a little bit out of your depth and to start trying to pull out all the bells and whistles and do things. I like the fact that on a 3rd and 7, they just dropped back straight up and took the one-on-one matchup to the outside and let the wide receivers go out there and win. I like the fact that on a 3rd and 5, they just ran a multi-level perimeter attack over on the right side of the field, allowed them to get the ball out to the sideline. I liked what we saw from there. So I really enjoyed watching Kellen Moore not get too big for his britches at any point throughout this game, and instead doing what it was that he knew would work, playing to the identity of the team, playing to the strengths of his players, and taking advantage of the matchups that were across from him. Now, after a certain point, we did see that Steve Spagnuolo defense start to put a little bit of pressure on Jalen Hurts, and therein lies one of my favorite adjustments that we saw from Kellen Moore, doing something that the New Orleans Saints have not been able to successfully do over the course of the past few years, and that is putting the quarterback in good situations. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by friends over at LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs is to help you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster and for free. And if you're a small business owner, LinkedIn Jobs is perfect for you. As a small business owner, your day never really ends when you clock out at 5. Even when you leave, your mind is still on the business. But with LinkedIn Jobs, when you clocked out, LinkedIn clocks in. So when you're looking to hire and expand your team, you're looking for the right people to bring into your situation to better improve your culture, or that you want to make sure work with your culture to help you better improve your efficiency, your productivity, all of that. LinkedIn is going to make sure that your jobs get in front of the right candidates and the highly qualified hires that you can find. So that's why 72% of small businesses say that LinkedIn has helped them find high quality hires. So post your job for free today at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. All right, family. The New Orleans Saints offense over the course of the past few years has had a lot of trouble adjusting. Pete Carmichael never had really a second punch or a counter punch, but it felt like he didn't have a punch in the first place. Then you got to Clint Kubiak last year, who had an outstanding outside zone run system, wide zone run system, but had a lot of trouble delineating from that and having something to find success with when that wasn't working. This is what I saw, which is in a better example of all of that, is what I saw from Kellen Moore on Super Bowl Sunday as the Philadelphia Eagles demolished the Kansas City Chiefs in Super Bowl 59. Now, I know, again, it wasn't all about the offense, but my focus was on Kellen Moore and what he was doing on the offense. So all throughout the game, I'm chatting with the insiders. I'm sending in like, hey, here's this, and here's how, here's what they just did, and here's how that translates either to what the team still needs in New Orleans or what the team actually still already has in New Orleans. And so it was really good to kind of be able to go back and forth and do that. I jotted down some of those notes as well over at LouisianaSports.net, but I want to share some with you. And my top adjustment was the fact that Kellen Moore and that Philadelphia Eagles offense continued to put Jalen Hurts in good situations. So there was a point at which Steve Spagnuolo's defense, the defensive coordinator for the Kansas City Chiefs, was generating a lot of pressure. And they were getting a lot of that pressure right up the middle in the face of the quarterback on the A-gap. So what did Kellen Moore do? Started to move the pocket, started to dedicate additional protection out of the backfield with the running backs right up the middle, and got the ball out of Jalen Hurts' hands quickly. Then, as the lead continued to grow for Philadelphia, Kansas City dialed back its blitz, started dropping more guys back, and then you saw the next step of the adjustment, which was going to the run game. So here's the sequence from the way that I saw it. You saw, first of all, a great blitz pickup by Saquon Barkley that was a design protection to keep Jalen Hurts clean, while Jahan Dotson on the outside, over on the right side, ends up fighting through press coverage and being able to make a big catch down the right sideline, 27-yard gain that put them in tush-push territory. Not hard to see where that translates to New Orleans. You think about Jahan Dotson fighting off at press coverage. Not hard to translate that to Chris Olave, who's fantastic against press man situations. So him being able to, by that time, being able to find a way to protect his quarterback and utilize Jahan Dotson's ability to fight off of that press coverage in the one-on-one situation on that outside, on that perimeter, bang, you can see how that immediately translates to what it is that New Orleans can do. Now the Saints can do some things to improve on the running or in the running back room to make sure that they're getting the type of pass protector that a Saquon Barkley has the ability to be, to pick up those blitzes. But outside of that, they have the pieces that they need in order to be able to execute those types of wins on the outside. Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed, these are guys that are very good up against press man coverage. Rashid Shaheed because of his speed, Chris Olave because he works off of that contact extremely well. Now you just have to have the quarterback to be able to get the ball down there, but that's going to be settled over the course of the next few years. This is a multi-year process, as we've discussed in the past. So I really enjoyed seeing that part. The next thing that you saw was as the Eagles were going, I believe it was in the second quarter, back towards the Girard end zone, you saw a couple of quick passes that ended up helping them get into the end zone as well. And those, or actually, I think it got them into a field goal situation. But quick passes, being able to get the ball out, going to Devontae Smith, coming off of the motion in the backfield, allowing him to go and pick up yards after carry or after the catch, getting Saquon Barkley involved in the passing game as well. Big completion down the right sideline. But even before that, a little dump off here and there. Always had sort of the safety valve for Jalen Hurts. So constantly and consistently, you saw Kellen Moore put the quarterback in position to succeed, mitigating the blitz, giving him options to be able to get the ball out of his hands quickly up against the pressure, and giving him options when he needed the safety valve. And then on top of all that, playing to the strengths of these one-on-one matchups that were being created because Kansas City consistently left their corners on an island. When they did that, and you've got A.J. Brown and you've got Devontae Smith, and you almost had Jahan Dotson scoring the first touchdown of the game, you take advantage of those opportunities. And I thought that Kellen Moore did a good job of doing that. Translating that to the New Orleans Saints, what we saw a lot of last season was when there was that pressure up the middle, the Saints couldn't do anything about it, either because of blitz recognition pre-snap or because they weren't adjusting in order to be able to, at least successfully, in order to be able to dedicate that additional protection to the quarterback from the backfield. That could be one of two things. Either they didn't adjust and add that protection in the backfield, or the protection was added in the backfield but wasn't executed properly. So in any case, you're looking at a little bit of a blend here between what's needed from the coach, the play caller, and what's needed from the personnel. And so upgrading some of that personnel obviously going to be a part of the conversation over the course of the coming years. Here's the other thing that I really enjoyed. Kellen Moore builds a 24-point lead. Well, not just Kellen Moore, right? Because there was the Cooper DeJean interception, the pick six, and stuff like that. So let's just say the Eagles, right? The Eagles build a 24-0 lead going into halftime. They come out of halftime. The defense gets another big stop on Kansas City as Kansas City starts with the ball in the second half. And then what did you see Kellen Moore and the Philadelphia Eagles do? They throttled the game down. Now, a lot of that was rushing with Jalen Hurts, but there was also a focus on the run game with Saquon Barkley. Why? You're protecting a lead, and you've got a team that's been running all over the place in the Kansas City Chiefs that maybe got a little bit of an extended halftime because of the halftime performance and all those other things. But outside of that, like, you've been attacking them a certain way all first half. Now all of a sudden you come back in the second half and it's an entirely different game plan. You're running the football instead of attacking deep. You're looking at sort of these shallow crossing routes and things like that you can be able to take advantage of. When they're not there, Jalen Hurts has the freedom to be able to run. So how does that translate to New Orleans? A, good coaching, good play calling. B, mobility at the quarterback position, I think, is going to be a major factor in what will lead to success, or the inability to find that mobile quarterback might lead to the failure of the Kellen Moore tenure. Looking at guys like Dak Prescott, who before his ankle injury or his lower leg injury was a mobile quarterback that wasn't necessarily what I would call a dual threat, but certainly could get out of trouble, pick up yards with his legs, all those other things. Justin Herbert, again, wouldn't call him a dual threat the way that you would say like a Lamar Jackson or a Jalen Hurts or a Josh Allen or a Jaden Daniels is, right? Those guys to me are dual threats. But mobility at the quarterback position, Baker Mayfield, Justin Herbert, Jalen Hurts, like there are these players that are more so the mobile quarterback that can get out of trouble, right? And I would put CJ Stroud in that category too. And so I think you look at that and say, okay, well, the Saints don't necessarily have that. Not with Derek Carr as the starter, right? He's got some mobility. He's got more athleticism than maybe some teams might expect. But is he a mobile quarterback or a dual threat quarterback? No. So I think that's another place that you'd be looking to add. The last thing was coming off of a turnover on downs, coming out of the long TV timeout, taking a 46-yard shot down the field to Devontae Adams, keeping your foot on the gas. That is the type of petty, that is the type of aggression, that is the type of play that New Orleans Saints fans want to see back in New Orleans. That was in the Superdome that just happened, but that used to happen all the time in the Superdome, and Saints fans want that back. I think that's another great way that Kellen Moore made his stamp in front of Saints fans and in front of the NFL world on Sunday night in that Super Bowl victory. So some big adjustments there all throughout the game, changing the game plan and then going back to the game plan, attacking deep, making sure you're protecting your quarterback and putting him in situations to succeed. But what about the scheme? What about the game plan? Well, there were some things that I really enjoyed seeing that the New Orleans Saints have simply been missing the boat on for the past few years that Kellen Moore looks like he would definitely bring to the Big Easy. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. The NFL season might be over, but just like us here on the Locked On Podcast Network, FanDuel isn't going anywhere. As the NBA season tips off, there's so much for you to check out over at FanDuel today. Tonight, you have the Utah Jazz taking on the new look Los Angeles Lakers after the stunning Luka Doncic trade. You've got the Lakers right now favored by 13 points after up against the Jazz, who, aren't having the hottest season so far as I've heard. So you can go and get in on that. It's a great spot when you have a heavy favorite like that if you're a new customer, because right now, new customers over at FanDuel Get $150 in bonus bets when you win your first $5 bet. That's just all you got to do is head over to FanDuel.com to join today. And over at FanDuel.com, you get your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Bet on a heavy favorite like the Los Angeles Lakers, $5, bang, you're there. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. Some scheme and game plan improvements that we can already see coming, with Kellen Moore expected to be the New Orleans Saints head coach and offensive play caller this year. One in the run game, one in the passing game, and both come off as things that are completely obvious, but were also completely obvious things that the New Orleans Saints simply failed to do over the course of the past few years. Let's start with the passing game, since that's kind of the heaviest piece that we've been discussing. And by the way, one of the other adjustments that you saw Kellen Moore make was to come in as the team that threw the third fewest passes in the NFL, number 29 in passing attempts across the league in 2024, and to dominate this game through the air. Huge. Perfect example of setting up a tendency all season long and breaking that tendency when you need it. The Philadelphia Eagles offense and Philadelphia Eagles team showing up 55 points in the NFC Championship game, 40 points in the Super Bowl. Talk about showing up when all eyes are on you and in the most important games. But two things that I really enjoyed seeing in Kellen Moore's scheme that I would like to see added and can't wait to see finally added to the New Orleans Saints offense. Number one in the passing game, crossing routes. I know that sounds ridiculous that I'm saying that, because it feels like crossing routes should be something that's available. But insiders will remember a film study that we did when Pete Carmichael was the offensive coordinator, where I would go passing play by passing play by passing play, and I would show the field, right? Just the routes that were being run, not the full play or anything like that. Just here's the field, right? Here's what it looks like as these routes are being run. And you would see a route down the one sideline, a route down the opposite boundary, nothing attacking the middle of the field, and some little kind of, outlets and opportunities, maybe in the short middle area if you're lucky, but most of which also out on the perimeter. And so what we saw was a lack of attack in the middle of the field. New Orleans did better at that last year, attack in the middle of the field, but they would typically do so with post routes that went to the middle of the field deep, hitches that stopped the momentum of the receiver, things like that. What we didn't see were a lot of concepts that included mesh concepts, right? The two kind of shallow crossers that cross one another, the crossing concepts over the middle of the field, things like that. We saw a lot of that on Sunday night in Kellen Moore's scheme. And I went back and I checked out a few games before I recorded this as well, just to make sure that that wasn't like part of the change in game plan for the Super Bowl or something like that. And really, it's something that they've done a good job of. In fact, going back to week 3 up against the New Orleans Saints, crossing routes punished the New Orleans Saints defense, as they so typically have for multiple years now, and when it was Dennis Allen's system. And so seeing that finally, on its way to New Orleans, presumably, is kind of exciting because it's something that every modern offense looks to do: create congestion in the middle of the field, challenge the eye discipline and the lane discipline of defenders, and force corners to run behind wide receivers. This is one of the biggest advantages of these crossing routes, because you're either running through zones on a horizontal plane, so you're open and then you're covered and then you're open again, or you're forcing a cornerback to trail behind you, especially when you have the type of speed that New Orleans has at wide receiver with guys like Rashid Shaheed and Chris Olave. Now, I thought that the A.J. Brown of it all kind of showed you how important it is for the New Orleans Saints to have a physical receiver. But keep in mind that A.J. Brown's like 6'1", but is also 220 plus pounds. So he's a how do I say this? He's a stocky build, right? A physical build, but he's not the tallest guy in the world. But he has an alpha mentality. Go and find you that alpha mentality to pair with all of your speed threats. I still think that should be a focus for New Orleans. But also adding in some of these crossing routes and some of these things that inherently challenge a defense, whether zone or man, is something that I think the New Orleans Saints could, should, and likely will benefit from moving forward. Now, again, Doesn't mean that you're going to see this team all of a sudden turn into a playoff contender in 2025. Those are different conversations. But these, again, are the building blocks towards improvement. And I think you saw that. The other thing that I really enjoyed in the run game was the diversity of it. Not only did you see the outside zone run, you saw inside zone runs, and you even saw gap concepts in terms of running in between the tackles as well. And so you were able, Philadelphia Eagles were able to keep the Kansas City Chiefs defense kind of off balance, because even if Kansas City won to the outside, Philly would be able to come right back and run up the middle. Then if they won up the middle, then they turn around and win on the outside too. It's just something that keeps you, what you're trying to do to any defense at any time is keep them off balance. You don't want a defense to ever be able to predict where you're going, predict what it is that you're doing, all those other things. And there was a level of predictability, and has been a level of predictability to offense in New Orleans since the departure of Sean Payton. And because of that level of predictability, the New Orleans Saints have lacked innovation, right? Because if you're being predictable, it means you're not adjusting. If you're not adjusting, it means that you're not growing. If you're not growing, it means that you're not innovating, right? So one leads to the other, which leads to the other, which leads to the other. And so for New Orleans, seeing a guy like Kellen Moore at the highest pressure point, going up against a dynastic team in the Kansas City Chiefs on the biggest stage that the NFL has to offer, and doing it in your home stadium, by the way, which is kind of super dope. That feels promising. That feels really, really promising. And maybe answering some of the leadership questions along the way. Yeah, there's some fire there, yelling at the referees and all those other things. And I get it. I know Nick Sirianni, Philadelphia Eagles head coach, did say, hey, let's run this blank back Kellen, everything like that. But I don't think that's going to be anything that's going to keep Kellen Moore in Philadelphia, because it's going to be the money that talks. And even I believe it was the owner that was interviewed. I believe it was the owner. I don't think it was Howie Roseman, but I think it was the owner of the Philadelphia Eagles, said that they're very much, they're prepared and they're expecting to lose Kellen Moore and all these other things. So I think this is still going the Saints' way. But man, look, ideally, you want a guy that a team doesn't want to lose, right? The worst case scenario is when you would go to hire somebody, and then the guy that, and then the people that are already employing that guy go, yeah, you can have him. Like, I'm going to wonder why. I'm going to wonder why in that situation. So I think between the addition of scheme and game plan improvements, the adjustments that were tracked throughout this game, as well as the attitude that you saw, the no foot off the gas type of approach, or keeping the foot on the gas type of approach, especially when you're going up against Kansas City Chiefs of all teams and everything. I thought all of that was promising. Does all of it mean that the Saints are Super Bowl champions next year and they're holding up the Lombardi in Santa Clara? No. But are the New Orleans Saints, let me say it this way, is the New Orleans Saints' first step in their process one that makes sense? Absolutely yes. And I think the absolute dismantleization of the Kansas City Chiefs on both sides of the football, but particularly over on offense in terms of what's relevant to New Orleans Saints fans, is a really, really promising sight. Now, got to figure out quarterback, got to hire the right defensive coordinator, and then see where you can build from there. But the foundation and the leader right now, 36-year-old Kellen Moore, carrying a lot of hope, a lot of achievement going into what we expect to be his new gig as the New Orleans Saints head coach. Coming up tomorrow, Ashton Jeanty at number 9. But is Jackson Dart the right choice for the New Orleans Saints in the first round? I'll tell you why I would go Ashton Jeanty 10 times out of 10 in that situation. We'll get that, as well as our 7-round mock draft, looking ahead to Kellen Moore's tenure in tomorrow's episode. We appreciate you very much as always. Making Locked On Saints a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me on the show. If you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing, how you living. Let me know how you're momming them. And trust you, that nation. I'll holla at you.